I mean, you showed up, and basically that is a prize in itself because you got to learn.
Brutal. Yeah.
Right.
You still got computer, that means alright. They haven't destroyed it. Well, yeah.
Okay, so I'm gonna start with an introduction to Windows. Now, I'm pretty sure everyone here knows what Windows is and how to use Windows in general. So the basics of Windows should be really easy, but of course, I'm actually going to show a bit of the management internals of Windows. Right, so Windows everywhere. Now, Windows is the most widely used desktop operating system with a 72.3% market share. It was created in 1985 by Bill Gates at Microsoft and ran on top of the MS-DOS. So this is the Microsoft Desktop Operating System. So when Microsoft built MS-DOS, it was actually a device that was entirely command line interface, and they built Windows as a graphical user interface extension of MS-DOS. So back then they would distribute these operating systems in CDs and sort of these like ROMs that you could put into your computer, and they would run sort of a Windows that looks like that. And since Windows has been created, there are 9 major versions of Windows which have been released, some of which are amazing and others not so much. And here's a fun fact. Windows 11 has a dialer program used to make phone calls back in the days when computers used to be directly connected to modems. And if you actually hit Windows R and put in dialer.exe, you'll find out that it actually still exists in Windows 11. So which is a pretty cool fun fact. So why learn about Windows? Windows is still one of the most dominant choices for enterprise OS systems. So Microsoft also, Microsoft provisions Windows devices, but most of these Windows devices are connected to something called Active Directory, and we'll go into more detail about that. But the fact is, 90% of Fortune 500 companies use Active Directory. So whenever we're talking about cybersecurity incidents like CrowdStrike, or whenever we're talking about forensics and sort of event and failure management, most times you actually have to learn about the internals of Windows to be able to work in a forensics role in cybersecurity. A lot of corporate tech systems relies on distributions of Windows, and a lot of domains, so this is what we're talking about, like exeter.ac.uk, or wherever domains that companies use, like google.com. They are often using a domain controller within their own corporate entity, and most of these domain controller software and servers are provided by Microsoft, which are running Windows. So you will need to understand Windows fundamentals if you're interested in forensics, if you're interested in understanding why things like CrowdStrike was even possible, or what happened during these incidents. And you can also use this information to safeguard and manage your own devices. So I have some fun facts here. 143,000 registered companies around the world use Active Directory. This is big companies. So any big company you can think of, even in the UK, we're thinking PYC, EY, Google, Microsoft, BAE Systems, Rolls-Royce, they all use Active Directory. So this is why learning a little bit more about Windows is pretty important. So, basics. The Windows user interface. You've got in the back the desktop, you've got a start menu, the taskbar, and system tray. I'm only saying this to give you a little bit of context into Windows user interfaces. So, despite what a lot of people say, including the quote at the very beginning of this presentation, Windows is really widely used because it is user-friendly. Now, there's a lot of things Windows arguably doesn't do perfect, but it captures the market really well because a lot of people find it easy to use, and it's the de facto operating system that is installed on most desktop devices today. Okay, so here are common Windows interfaces that you may have already discovered. or have used in your day-to-day life. So we've got the command prompt, we've got PowerShell, the File Explorer, the control panel, settings, Windows Security or Defender, you've got the network and sharing sensor, and the task manager. So these are interfaces that you might be familiar with and things that you might use day-to-day basis. Now, what I will focus on in this lecture is the Windows management interfaces. So I'm going to do a mini quiz style to see how many of these icons you actually recognize. So if anyone knows the answer, just give a shout and we'll go through each of these icons. Anybody know the first one? Yep. Yep, that is the registry editor. Does anyone have an idea of what the second one is? Yeah. Yes, device management. Wow, you're good. What's the third one? So this may not refer to a specific interface, but a system in general. Yeah. Yeah. Admin. Yeah, that's a correct answer.
Is it UAC?
It is UAC. It is the user account control. So whenever you install something, you might get that annoying noise like bloom. Please click accept to install this. What does anyone know what the fourth one is? So this one's quite an old icon from around Windows 7. You might encounter this when something's not working.
Troubleshooting?
Yes, so it's Windows troubleshooting. Whoops, I gave the other one away, but that one's pretty obvious. Windows firewall. And the next one? Yeah.
Task, SCHD, task scheduler.
Is task scheduler. And the next one? Say it. Oh, yes. I'm actually surprised you know the exact command as well. That's really impressive. And the last one. So yes, it is Resmon, or it could be Perfmon. They actually share the same icon in the taskbar. Right, so these are the interfaces that we will look into. But first, we're going to look into the Windows file system structure. So this is essentially, I'm trying to mirror what Maxime has already done with the Linux file system. So we've got the C drive, which is typically used to represent the drive that Windows is installed on, or the operating system drive. But it doesn't have to be C, it can be any letter. It can be D, E, F, G, up to Z, or even A and B. And the main structure of the Windows file system is into these three categories of folders. So we've got application files. So this is anything you install. You've got Chrome, you've got your games, you've got your utility software, maybe Microsoft Office. They all live here. These are your user files. So this is all the stuff that you will probably access. Anything that you download goes into your user files. Any documents that you make, for example, maybe Python code that you write for your coursework, these all live here. And these are operating system files. So I've listed a few here that I feel are the most important. So we've got System32, which is all the system internal components of the operating system. We've got syswal64, which is so this is actually backward compatibility libraries for 32-bit software to run on Windows. We've got SX.
Side by side.
Yes, side by side. I'm sorry. we've got fonts and other resources used for the Windows operating system. Right, so what is the Windows file system? The Windows file system is NTFS, which stands for New Technology File System. What's so good about NTFS is that it supports extra features on top of its predecessor, which was FAT32, such as access control lists. We've got transaction logging or journaling. So this is when they save all the changes of a file to a log, and that's usually used to restore or recover corrupted or damaged files. We've got the encrypting file system. So this is file encryption that allows you to use your Windows credentials to encrypt a file. And it also supports folder and file compression. So the maximum theoretical file limit for NTFS is actually 16 exabytes. I think that's like 16,000 terabytes. Correct me if I'm wrong. But the the actual practical maximum on Windows for the maximum file size is 16 terabytes. And that's actually a substantial improvement from its predecessor, FAT32, which the maximum file size was only 4 gigabytes. So if you think about today, we've got data sets, we've got machine learning models, all of those are typically more than 3-4 gigabytes if you download them all at once. We've got huge zip files. So there definitely needed to be a change in the file system in order for the modern desktop environments we use today. So here are the common file paths that I'm guessing that you would already know, but it is good to know. We've got System32, so we've got the core system files, system utilities, and the Windows kernel components. You've got the users, so these are all your users files as seen in the other diagram. Your program files, which is all your application files. And I've put one here called app data. This is essentially application-specific settings. So anything to do with user configuration, cache files, your Minecraft world saves. And we've got Windows Temp, which is all the temporary application-generated files, which are used for a short period of time. Now, unlike the temp file in Linux, these files don't get deleted, and they actually persist in the file system. And there is this recurring sort of thing where people tell you, oh, you have to clean out your temp file because they can grow really, really big. By practical design, these files should be deleted when they're no longer used, but a lot of programs in Windows don't. So that's the reason why your temp file grows bigger and bigger, even though technically all those files you may not need anymore. Okay, so the NTFS file permissions. So these are all the file permissions in Windows. So on the top row in the header, you've got all the basic permissions, and on the side, you've got all the advanced permissions. So this is just a subset of permissions that are designated for example, files and directory permissions. And on the top, that's what you see when you sort of look at the file properties of a folder. So you might see like, oh, you have full control, or you have read and write permissions for this specific folder or file. But on the left-hand side, where you've got all the permissions, those are actually the granular permissions that are set for every single file. So if you actually go into the metadata of a file, these are all the permissions that you can assign or not assign, and so allow and deny to a user. So I've essentially opened the file properties of one of my folders. So you can see on the left-hand side, that's the first thing you see when you click properties on a folder. But if you go and click advanced in, I don't have a pointer, but if you go and click advanced, you will see this sort of dialog. And essentially on the left, it corresponds to all the basic permissions. And in the advanced section, you've got all of the granular permissions that you can set for a file or folder. Okay, so these lists are applied to every user or group with the least privilege, sort of, with least privilege. If you assign any of these permissions to, for example, yourself, usually the scope of these permissions will only apply to the exact files that you specify. So if you see up there it says applies to, you can apply it to just the folder, so not all the subfolders that are created or copied into this folder. Okay, so now we've got users, accounts, and groups. So there are 4 types of accounts in Windows 11. You've got the administrator, a standard user, a guest, and a child account. We'll only focus on the first 3 because a child account is more like a Microsoft family thing, which has certain caveats for that account. But these accounts have different levels of privileges. It gives your system an extra layer of security. And all files can be set with account level permissions as well as group level permissions. And usually a desktop computer will only have local groups. So this means that you're not going to see groups that are shared across an organization unless you are using like a domain joined device. So this is the main difference between all of the groups. You've got the administrator. They can modify all system settings. They can install or uninstall any application. They can access every file on the computer. They can escalate privileges using the UAC prompts. They can disable security features. And they can add, delete, and modify other users. A standard user, on the other hand, can only modify some system settings. So they can only install or uninstall applications that don't require administrator permission, which is not a lot of applications, actually. And you can modify user-level settings. So we're talking about, your color themes, your desktop backgrounds, these kind of settings that don't really affect the overarching system. And we've got guest accounts. So guest accounts don't have access to any system settings at all. They can't install or uninstall any software. And all changes in the system made by a guest account is only temporary. So any files that they make or anything that they do on the computer, that doesn't get saved. It's wiped out and after the session ends. Okay, so I've talked a little bit about Active Directory, which is sort of this Microsoft enterprise software. And I'll give you a bit of a brief introduction to Active Directory, because Active Directory is sort of a whole topic on its own, and it can actually take up an entire lecture as well. But Active Directory is a Microsoft directory service for Windows domain networks. So what are we talking about when I'm talking about a directory? If you think about File Explorer in your own sort of like user files, you've got an overview of all the files that you have. You have the idea of the hierarchy of files that you have. Now, this is sort of like a corporate level File Explorer for all the people and services that are on their network. It provides features such as IT administration. It provides access control. It also provides things like group policies. So a lot of enterprises, when, for example, if you go and join or work for a software company, usually the first thing they'll do is onboard you. They'll take you to the IT department, and usually IT either does something on your computer to join it to the network, or they'll give you a laptop that's already domain joined. So in Windows, the context of Windows, the users and groups that exist in Windows also work with Active Directory. So if you are a user in a big organization, for example, you are the admin of a certain department, that gets carried over to the entire organization. And that means that any permissions or file permissions that are shared across the entire network that you have access to, you can access from any computer that is domain joined, of course, with your credentials. Right. The Active Directory stores a lot of information. And so I did a bit of work on Active Directory during my placement to integrate it with some software. For example, giving people the ability to log into a web app using their Active Directory credentials. And the thing is, Active Directory stores a lot of information. So we're talking about emails, we're talking about all your groups, all your permissions, we're talking about even the hashed versions of your profile pictures all live in Active Directory. So Active Directory is something that Microsoft doesn't really advertise to the average consumer. But because it's so widely used, it's also a focal point on topics like forensics. So whenever we have things like data breaches, or when people somehow use reconnaissance to actually hack into an organization, oftentimes the attack vector is using Active Directory as well. Okay. So now we're going to go into the management components of Windows. I think what I'm going to do, because we're just 20 minutes in, is I'm going to try and do a live demo of all of the interfaces I want to show you. You'll have the slides with you after this lecture, so you can always refer back to it. You'll have the video as well. There's a little bit of extra information for all of these, but it's quite straightforward. So what I'm going to do now is exit out of the presentation, and I'm going to try to make it as big as I can. Okay, so the first one that I'll show you is the control panel. It's something that everyone really knows how to use. Although right now, Windows is in this weird state of porting everything over to the new UI. So if you ever sort of access system information, what used to be like a control panel dialog is now sort of like Windows settings. It's really annoying. But essentially, control panel used to be the go-to management interface for sysadmins, and anything wrong with your computer, you could probably solve it through the control panel. Okay, and the next one is the task manager. So you can do Control-Shift-Escape, or you can type in task mgr into the run dialog. What you can do here is you can access all the processes that are running. You've got a high-level overview of all the system resource usage. And arguably the most important feature of the Task Manager is that here you can access exactly what apps you want to start up when your computer runs. Which, honestly, I would love to turn this one off. It's very annoying. Okay, perfect. Okay. I don't know what on earth I just did, but... What? Okay, that's something new. I haven't seen that before.
Yeah, we can fill the screens.
It's just changed my refresh rate, function or anyway.
Maybe projector is not supporting any higher.
Yeah, probably. It makes sense. Okay. So the next one is system configuration. It's msconfig.exe. This is not really well known, but this is essentially boot diagnostic tool. So if anything went wrong with your Windows, if you still managed to boot into the system, but something went wrong, during startup, during boot, you can go into this tab, and essentially you can boot into safe mode. You can put all of the extra boot flags that you want to diagnose your PC. But what is really interesting about the system configuration is that you've got a litany of tools over here, which is actually a good overview of the management interfaces that you might need to learn for things like forensics. And the nice thing about system configuration is that whenever you click on this, it shows you the command. So, for example, if you want to go into computer management, it shows you've got comp mgmt.msc. Right, so we can look at the different dialogues that I want to talk about. The first one is to change, my bad. I clicked OK and not launch. Okay, there we go. So this is the UAC settings. This essentially tells Windows how often to notify you with a UAC prompt. If you set the slider to never notify, then you can kind of get rid of all those prompts, like whenever you need to install something with admin rights. Whereas if you put it to the max, they will always notify you, like whenever you change a setting or install any software. So pretty simple, it's a slider, but this is one of the things that you kind of should look at if you're talking about compromised systems, because often what happens is that the UAC prompts are set to never notify, and also the users are themselves administrators on their computer. So sometimes malware can actually change the registry keys to set that to never notify. This is a good way of visualizing what the state of the computer is in. Okay, so next one is computer management. Over here, I'm going to launch that. This is the main tool that we'll discuss about. It's got a lot of other tools which can actually run standalone. But so you've got the task scheduler, you've got event viewer, you've got the performance and resource monitors, device management, and disk management. But to make it easier, I'm just going to access everything that I want to talk about through here. So the first one is the device manager. This is just used to manage all hardware devices on your computer. So we're talking about you can troubleshoot, you can install new drivers, you can look at the actual hardware information. So we're talking about the names of your GPUs, we're talking about the type of graphics that your computer uses. So we can talk about also the peripherals and USB ports that are available on your computer. So one of the fun facts I learned about the device manager is that oftentimes when you click or you right click on something and you click update driver, Windows will say like, oh, the best drivers in your device are already installed, even though that's not actually true. There's always newer drivers, especially for your graphics. But why is that exactly? Microsoft actually has a catalog of drivers that you can view on the website that I've put in the slides. And there's sort of a lot of drivers that predate 2017, very old drivers. Now, why is it really useful for Microsoft to do this? The main reason is because if something goes wrong with one of your peripherals and the drivers just stop working, Microsoft can actually pull from that catalog to give you a very generic driver just to make sure that things work again. So this is really useful when it comes to like your monitor stops working and nothing you do will actually work. Being able to put a generic driver in first to make your screen work again before repairing anything else is something that's very useful with the device manager. Okay, the next one is the performance monitor. So what the performance monitor is that you can use this tool for a historical performance report. So essentially, if I go into the monitoring tools and go into performance monitor, I can add a specific measurement that I want. So this can be like processor information. And I can essentially track the real-time usage statistics of all of the measurements that I want. And this is pretty good because what you can do is use this tool to identify long-term trends in resource usage on Windows. So sometimes when we're talking about things like Trojans or malware, that is harder to detect. So even if Windows Defender can't find it actively just by scanning all the files, you can actually use the performance monitor to identify sort of erroneous behavior, or for example, if something leads to a memory leak. This is also a good way of graphing the trends in resource usage. Okay. So if I go back here, it's perfect. I can open the resource monitor from here. The resource monitor is slightly different from the performance monitor. What I've got here is real-time data. So rather than graphing it over a period of time, I'm just getting data right now. And how this is useful is that it provides you a set of advanced tools to look at a more granular distribution of things like memory, CPU usage. So if I go into the memory tab, so you can see here that I can see exactly what my physical memory is allocated to. This is really useful because you can see exactly like how much memory is allocated to hardware, how much of it is being used by your applications right now, and how much of it is actually free. I don't have a lot of free memory right now. Some of it is on standby. This is also good for trying to identify things like memory fragmentation. So, for example, some software might eat up a lot of memory over time, but you might not identify exactly. So if you look in Task Manager, it will still say it uses like 10 or like 100 megabytes of RAM. But over time, fragments of that memory have been left. And this is a good tool for doing analysis on that. Okay, the next one I want to show you is actually not in computer management. So this is the executable for the performance monitor. If you put a flag in /rel, you can actually view the reliability monitor. Now, for some reason, this is under the control panel dialog and not under performance monitor. You can't access it from there. But this is also a really useful tool for identifying all the previous faults in your computer. So anytime an application crashed or your computer went into blue screen, this is sort of like a history of how reliable your computer has been running as an operating system. So I don't have a lot of things here, but essentially the example I put in the slides is from my PC, and it has crashed a lot in the last sort of 2-3 weeks. So you'll see a lot of errors there. One of the interesting things is that you can see here on the side, you've got something called Windows failures. So these failures are actually tracked by Windows to determine if you should boot into recovery mode. If your PC, for example, has like a hard disk failure and you can't boot up the operating system, after I think 3 consecutive failed attempts, it will boot you into recovery mode. And when it does that, it actually records the event as a Windows failure as well. Okay. Next one is disk management. So if anyone has had to sort of format or create volumes, this disk management is pretty useful. Interestingly, the GUI is not the most reliable in the world, especially if you're working with disks that are misbehaving. So we're talking about disks that are in a state of limbo, of being interpreted as a storage device or a flash drive. I recommend the disk part sort of command utility if you want to sort of clean and format drives. But this is really useful because, for example, you can sort of resize volumes. You can make space, for your Linux partition if you want to dual boot, things like that. Okay, I'll go on quickly. So the next one it's not here. We've got services dot, no, not exe. I misspelled that. Okay, so if it shows up, we've got the list of all services on Windows. When we're talking about services, this is the equivalent of like etc/system d/system. All of the system files are represented here. And when we're talking about services, we're talking about features on Windows, such as printing. We're talking about Bluetooth. We're talking about like OpenSSH agents. Those things run as services, and you can enable or disable them through this dialog. Okay. Next one. No, I did that again, didn't I? Yeah. Next one is the local users and groups. So this is the local user manager. Well, that didn't work, but I think if you have Windows 10 Professional or 11 Professional, you can access all of the users and groups. I'll show you briefly how that looks like. We got here. Okay, you know what? What I'll do is I'll just go back into the presentation because I think we've got a good live demo. Oh, actually, no. I still want to go through command prompt as well. So if you look over here at the local groups and users, Yeah, so you can see that what you're supposed to see is a folder of users and groups that exist on your computer. This is really useful because you can, from this panel, you can manage, delete, modify users straight away if you're an admin. And yeah, the key fact I've put here is that you should disable the default administrator account. This is actually also a common attack vector for malware. If your administrator account is active, any malicious user could actually use your administrator account to steal or infect or hack your computer. Right, I'm gonna exit out of this again and go to the next one. And the next one is the event viewer. So event VWR, exe. This is sort of like the Windows audit log. You can view logs for things to do with security, things to do with your applications. So, whenever your application crashes or things happen, you can view your logs over here. They don't seem to be loading for some reason. Okay. Yeah, they're loading now. So you can see here that we can look at the errors here and see what went wrong on Windows. And the reason we talk about this is because a lot of unsuspecting individuals, especially people who are called by scammers, they tend to use this as a reason for why a person needs technical support. Don't be fooled, obviously. These are just normal logs. It's normal to have errors and warnings in your system because things do go wrong. Okay, and the second last one is Task Scheduler. No, that's wrong extension. Task Scheduler. This is the equivalent of cron jobs in Windows. Essentially, all tasks that are automatic or have a custom trigger exist here. So, for example, it could be like there's software that needs to run when your computer starts, or it can be that certain software have a predetermined time for fetching updates. All of these live here. And for example, if you have a task that you want to start automatically, for example, you've got wallpaper that you want to show at certain times, you could use the task scheduler as well. Okay, and the last one is the registry editor. No, I did that again, didn't I? Okay, so we've got the registry editor. They are separated into hives. In the hives, you've got the keys. I won't go into too much detail, but essentially, this is the central database of all Windows settings that exist on your computer. If you have an application that can change the system setting, most likely what they're doing is interacting with the registry. Over the years, there have been many famous hidden settings in the registry. For example, the ability to disable Cortana, which was Windows 10's voice assistant that pretty much no one I know has ever used. Okay. So if you go in, you can look at the keys, and they will have like a key value format. They can have certain types. They can be integers. They can be certain like D words. And okay, right, here are 6:15. So what I'm going to go through is some basic command prompt commands. So I want to launch the command prompt as an administrator, so I'm going to use this command.
Sorry, what's it between PowerShell and command prompts?
This is just a really fast command for me to go into command prompt as administrator, because I don't always remember where to right click to click run as administrator.
Because I saw the two apps earlier I haven't used Windows for, and why not just have one terminal app?
Oh, so are you asking what the difference is?
Yeah.
PowerShell is like the bash scripting equivalent of Windows. It has a lot of scripting features for you to run automated scripts. Command prompt is more like a separation of responsibility, where command prompt has a certain predefined set of commands where you can interact with system settings, but it is not designed to be scriptable, so you don't have things like for conditionals, loops, things like that, whereas PowerShell does. So the main difference is PowerShell is a command line interface and also scripting language, but command prompt is just command line interface. I don't remember how to open command prompt as administrator. Okay, there we go. Okay, simple commands. Got host name. Thank you. I think it was CMD, but I've just forgotten off the top of my head. So this is the host name of my computer. If I want to see what user I'm using, this is me. Who am I? Got the ipconfig command. This is just your basic overview of all your network information. Things like network adapter information, MAC addresses, and what we've got here as well as netstat. So netstat is a command that shows you all the active connections and ports that are listening on your computer. So if I do netstat-a, what you see here is that I've got a whole bunch of TCP ports that are actively listening. Not quite sure what services they are, but that's quite a lot of ports that are listening. Okay, I'm going to stop now because they're still enumerating through all the ports. So one of them I've got is sfc/scannow. This is probably a common diagnostic command. If anything went wrong with your computer and there are damaged or corrupted files, this is the command that you would run to repair the files. Now, I wouldn't run it now because it does take quite a long time, like 5-ish minutes on my computer, the last time I ran it. Another useful command is systeminfo. So, I did it again. So this used to be what you would see if you clicked on system and control panel. It would give you a whole bunch of DMI strings. So what are DMI strings? They're just hardware labels. They essentially describe the hardware on your computer and also the software that you run. So for example, what you've got here is this is an Asus laptop manufactured by Lenovo. There is also the command line equivalent, which is called systeminfo. And if we give it a bit of time, it will also spit out the same information. So I can see here that, this is a system manufacturer, this is the system model. When you see that GUI I showed you earlier, this is the actual command running under the hood. And lastly, we've got just a few network commands. So ping, just ping Google. Yeah. Same as Linux. We've got NSLOOKUP as well. So this is to access your DNS records, see what it resolves to. And you've got traceRT. So this is also the same as traceroute in Linux. It just shows you, it sends out ICMP echo packets and then it tells you which route it went through. So again, I'll just use google.com. Okay, that's pretty slow, but I'll blame it on eduroam anyway. One more command I've got is net accounts. So the net command is used to access resources on your network. But the net account command is really useful because net accounts. This is used to actually access and see what your password and account lockout policy is. So if you ever work for a company and then you'll see the dialog that says, your password has expired, please change it. This is where you would find the information for how often you would have to change it. It's not so useful on your own computer. You don't really have to change your password ever, but it is something that is a utility command. Oops. And the last one is this part. This is a command line utility. You can use it to sort of see your disks, to see your partitions, and you can wipe out your disk if you so wish. Okay. So what I'll do now is go back into the presentation. So yeah, this is a summary of all of the management components I've gone through, and this is also a table of all of the commands I've just showed in the live demo. Feel free to refer back to it. I think the workshop on Thursday will be on TryHackMe, and so you will find these commands useful as well. Right, so the last part is Windows security. I'm sure you've opened the screen. It's just to show you that Windows divides the areas of protection into different sections. You've got virus and threat protection, account protection, firewall and network protection, app and browser control. Now, interestingly, if you see I think you can see my cursor. Yeah, if you see the warning down here, it says memory integrity is off. Windows doesn't turn this on by default, and it says it's a problem. But at the same time, turning it on can cause a lot of problems, especially if you game. I don't really know why, but don't say I didn't warn you. Okay, so the last part is not really important. You may not need to know this for general Windows purposes. So BitLocker encryption is a Windows 11 professional feature and enterprise. It essentially is a security feature that allows you to encrypt your entire hard drive to protect from unauthorized access if a device is lost, stolen, or decommissioned. BitLocker requires a crypto processor in your device called TPM. Most versions of Windows 11 need TPM 2.0. And essentially a TPM is like a hardware processor that you can use to generate and store encryption keys. Each TPM is sort of like each TPM has a burned in sort of like root key, and from that key it generates all the other temporary keys that your computer uses to sort of log in and store credentials. Your operating system drive will be encrypted using a key, and that's usually your Windows password, but you'll be assigned a 48-character BitLocker recovery key. If you start working, you will be given this. Don't lose it, because if you do, you can never recover your files ever again. And I'm speaking from experience. Right, so last part is the Windows Authentication Protocol. This is sort of what your computer, if it's domain joined, or if you're part of an organization and they give you a laptop, this is the authentication protocol they use to sort of check which Windows user are you and what role are you. The first protocol I'm talking about is the NTLM, which is the New Technology LAN Manager. It uses a challenge response mechanism. So the way it works is the client sends the username, the host or the Windows server sends back a random number, and the client will respond with the hashed password on that random number. So it's like a hash function. It will perform it on that number with the password, sends it back to the host, and the host checks if that password matches any user. This is what Windows used to use for authenticating users on Active Directory. It's not used anymore because it's not as secure as what they have now, which is Kerberos. If you ever see Kerberos being used, this is usually in an enterprise context. So what's different now is that they've separated the host into different services. So we've got the ticket granting service, which essentially a client who wants to log in to any resource on the network will go to the ticket granting service and say, hey, can I get a TGT, which is a ticket granting ticket? Essentially, without a TGT, you can't get tickets. And tickets are sort of cryptographically secure pieces of data, which it's kind of like a driving license or like a guest pass for you to access something. What's different now is that the server sends back you a TGT with a session key, and then what you'll do is you'll request the authentication service with this TGT, and then the ticket that you get back from the authentication service is used to access the actual service you want to access. So I'm talking about if you want to access DNS, if you want to access domain controller, if you want to access DHCP, the tickets are different for each service that is provided. It's not hugely important, it's kind of complicated, but if you are interested in IT, this is something that you may want to know. Right, essential tips. Keep Windows Defender enabled, quite simple. Keep USC controls at default or always notify. Keep your Windows up to date, so remember to check for updates, well, until Microsoft makes Edge your default browser again, which is very annoying. Disable the default administrator account, as I said earlier. Keep the Windows Firewall enabled. This is pretty much what you would have been taught maybe in IT in primary school. Just like keep Windows up to date, don't do anything silly, don't download stuff from sources that you don't know, and always make sure that you make restore points before editing the registry, because things can go really wrong if you don't have a restore point. Make sure you check your browser extensions for Trojans. And the last one is pretty interesting. So I'm linking here software that allows you to disable telemetry on Windows. Essentially, if you have to use Windows, but you absolutely hate it, you absolutely don't want to send any of your diagnostic data to Windows, which it does, even if you opt out of most of the setup features. This is a really good software that abstracts from the registry, gives you all the features like disabling your webcam, disabling your browser from accessing your camera, your location. All of those settings are available in this free software. You can download it and you can sort of protect yourself from sending any extra data to Microsoft. Okay, and that's the end of the lecture. So if you have any questions or if you want to talk about Windows, which I don't really want to, feel free to ask. Okay.